Hey, welcome back to another TouchDesigner tutorial. Today, we're going to be exploring some object tracking in TouchDesigner using the free version of TouchDesigner and some of the new features that we developed for the MediaPipe plugin. And here's a couple examples of what that can look like. You might have seen some examples of this using something like TouchDesigner's built-in blob tracking, but on the free version of TouchDesigner, you're actually limited to only tracking 2 blobs. And one thing that's really nice is using this new free update from MediaPipe, you can do this out of the blocks super easily. So because the setup is so quick, for this tutorial, we're actually going to spend some time looking at how to make some custom audio. So taking the object tracking and then finding different ways of sonifying it. We'll look at taking some of the object tracking and using the position, converting that into Midi notes, and then sending that over to software like Ableton to sonify it. And you can feel free to use any other digital audio workstation that you feel comfortable working in. Before we jump in, I want to give a huge thanks to all my Patreon supporters and to all of my top Patreon supporters here. If you join my Patreon, you'll get access to exclusive content, all of my custom project files, plugins, and also a private Discord where you can ask me any questions. If you follow along with this tutorial, you'll be able to recreate the object tracking as well as sending some of those positional pieces straight to your computer's audio buffer to sonify it. The MIDI controlling I'll actually put inside the project file on my Patreon. So you'll be able to follow along for most of it, but if you want that custom component, it'll be in the project file, which I'll put a link to in the description. All right, let's go ahead and dive into it. Go ahead and head on over to the GitHub page for MediaPipe, which I will put a link to in the description. And if you scroll down, there's a big green button that says download latest release. Go ahead and click that and make sure you have the most up-to-date version of TouchDesigner as well. For these new features with the object tracking, you'll have to download the latest release of MediaPipe. While that's downloading, go ahead and download the NDI tools. So this is my new favorite way to be able to take any video content within TouchDesigner and then send it over to MediaPipe. You can always use Spout or Siphon Cam, but this is a really great setup because it'll actually work the same across Mac and Windows. So go ahead and download and install NDI tools. You might need to restart your computer after installing NDI tools just to make sure that it's picking up and creating the virtual cameras for you. The last thing you're going to need to install, if you're on Windows, you're going to need this software called Loop Midi, which you can find a link to over here. This allows you to be able to route MIDI signals between software like Ableton and TouchDesigner. We'll go over how to set this up later, and on Mac, that already comes pre-configured, so we'll go over how to actually set that up on your Mac as well. Let's go ahead and make sure that you unzip the release folder. On Windows, it's really easy to just open up the folder while things are still zipped, and that will actually cause your project to break. So if you're on Windows, make sure that you extract the contents first and then go ahead and open it up. So for this example, we're actually just going to open up the MediaPipe TouchDesigner toe. All right. So when we first open the project, this might look a little overwhelming, but we're actually going to pare it down to just a couple core components. So this is set up to be able to use the face tracking, hand tracking, like all the different models. We're just going to use the object tracking, which you can actually see right over here. And right now it's only detecting a person very confidently because I'm in the frame. Let's go ahead and clean up the project a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off all of the other models that are being used. So if I go click on the MediaPipe component, click on the MediaPipe tab, we're going to turn off everything except for detect objects. And then we're going to get rid of these helper components. So we don't need any of these. Make sure to save these components at the top, these channels. We're going to get rid of these little examples over here, everything over here. We don't need the face detector or anything underneath, but we want to hang on to this webcam chain over here. Basically, this is what we want to have left. The object tracking, this set of components for handling the webcam, and these chops up here, which handle some timing. Sometimes it's helpful to be able to just have your webcam detecting in MediaPipe, but it can also be nice to be able to bring in a custom video or to be able to modify your webcam before it gets passed into MediaPipe. So that's why we have the NDI tools. Basically, the NDI tools are going to show up as a webcam that we can select. So in our case, we're going to go over here and there should be a dropdown now that says NDI Virtual Cam. And if you click on that, right now we're not sending anything to NDI. And so it's not going to be updating, but this is our new webcam. And now we need to figure out what we want to send to NDI. So that's what this little video device in setup is for. If I turn this on, now my webcam is getting brought in here. On Windows, we keep this off by default because you can only have one video device in from a webcam at a time. And we don't actually need it going to spout siphon out. Instead, we want to connect a NDI out and we can give it a name. So in this case, let's call it NDI TD. You can give it any name that you want. And now what we need to do is open up NDI virtual input. So once you've installed the NDI tools, this software will be available. And this part can be a little finicky. I feel like sometimes it'll take a minute to kind of update. Like here, it's getting the wrong name for the channel. Like it's picking up that we're sending some output, but it's getting the original name. So sometimes I'll have to like toggle on and off the NDI out and then go back to the software. Hopefully it'll pick up this new name. Maybe we'll quit NDI virtual input, try opening it up again. We'll select none. Let's see, hopefully this will show up. There we go. Now finally I can select the dropdown again, and then I'll go back over here. I'll select NDI. For whatever reason, once I close out of the software, then it starts to update correctly. So I quit the NDI virtual input, even though when I have it open here, it should be displaying the feed, but I've selected the correct one, and once I quit the application, now it's running correctly. So in theory, we could bring in any video now and connect this to our setup, and that would be run through MediaPipe. So if I go in and I snag this 4K wave video, I'm actually going to go into the tune section and hardware decode it just to optimize the performance a little bit, and we'll connect it here and here. And now check it out. This is great. We've got our 4K waves. It's not really detecting anything. And we can actually modify that. I feel like really this process is kind of just done by doing really bad object detection. So in our case, if you go to objects, you can see this minimum object score. So this tells MediaPipe how confident it needs to be in seeing something in order for it to output that. So if you set it really low, all of a sudden the model is going to start kind of like hallucinating all these different things or all these different objects that it thinks it's seeing. So in our case, it thinks this is a person or a cow or a dog, but it does give us this kind of like fun visualization overall. And we can also do some nice modifications here by taking a threshold of it. So in between this scale and the NDI out, what we can do is insert a threshold top, and we can increase this threshold quite a bit until we just get kind of the main highlights of that video. So now only the bright parts of the image are getting object detection run on them. And what we can do as well is let's like overlay the video. So here we can see the object tracking is being done. There's a purple tab, and if we right click on it and connect it to a null, what we can do is place down an over. And then now we can take this output of this resync cache and we'll connect that to the output of the over. So now these are getting layered on top. The resync cache, there can be a little bit of a delay between the processing time for when MediaPipe finishes analyzing a video frame, and the resync cache is going to be able to resynchronize the output of MediaPipe to whatever your initial input is. So basically this will be lining up on the correct frames. So let's go ahead and preview this in our background. We can kind of see that it's detecting some elements, and we can kind of fine tune this as well by maybe bumping this threshold up even more. And there's a couple different parameters that we can change on the object tracking. So if you turn the motion easing all the way down, it's going to be a very real-time visualization of everything it's detecting. There's a couple new visualizations that we built in automatically. So instead of doing rectangles, you can turn that off, and we can turn on circles, and it will start drawing those highlights. And we also have another variation that will do connecting lines. So if I draw this, it will start to draw these lines that are interconnecting all the different pieces that are drawn. If you want to modify these, you can actually just go inside the object tracking, and you'll notice that like here are the pieces of geometry that are being rendered. And you can kind of customize this. So for example, if you wanted to have curved lines, you could insert an operator and you could convert the lines from all types to Bezier curves. And now you'll get these kind of curved segments instead of these straight lines. That could be kind of a fun way of visualizing it. And another thing that you can do as well is here's the line material that's used for all of the different settings. So we can right click on it and open up the parameters. And if we go back up, you can really easily in the setup section control the like near width, and this will control the thickness of all of your lines very, very easily. You could also go in and change the color of the line. That's actually set up in the parameters over here, so you can change this to whatever you want. And maybe for this effect as well, I kind of like adding a little bit of bloom on the lines. So we'll tack that in, and that adds kind of a little bit of glowing to it. So the way that I was able to create that like flashlight effect was actually by taking my webcam and using that instead of this wave video. So I'll put a null down real quick so that we can swap out our webcam. And if I adjust this threshold, you'll see that like only little bits of my face are showing through right now. And if I were to use a flashlight or just like use the light on my phone, you'll see that this is going to kind of like take over a lot of the brightness. So what I ended up doing is I kind of like fine-tuned this threshold so that maybe only that light source is coming through. And then I can, if I illuminate my hand now, you'll see that these are the two kind of brightest points in the image. And so I'll start getting these sort of connecting lines. And then if I shine it at my face, that will also show up much brighter. But kind of a fun way of doing some different visualizations. And the threshold is a great way of kind of highlighting some of those core details to add in those highlights. Another approach that you might want to try is like caching the difference between frames and then kind of highlighting those. So maybe instead of a threshold, we'll make a cache, and maybe we'll connect a cache select, and you can just drag and drop this on, and we'll set this to be like -2 frames. Then what you can do from here is take the difference, and now you should really only be getting these highlights or changes in motion. And so you can kind of see like as there's motion, those pieces will end up getting highlighted. And one thing to remember too is that whatever is going to the NDI out here is what the analysis is going to be done on, and then whatever is coming out of your resync is what you'll be compositing for your visuals. So kind of a fun process for it. I kind of like the threshold overall, so I might go back to that original version. I'll do a little bit of a threshold here and really, really tone it down. There we go. And the other thing to play around with is to, go back in, and you can always change the confidence here. So if we set the score even lower, we'll get way more points, and then we can set it a little bit higher. I kind of liked where it was originally, but fun things to play around with overall. Maybe I'll switch over to the waves and adjust the threshold. There we go. All right, so for this next part, what I want to do is actually sonify this and take this line information, and I want to be able to have things that are drawn on the right-hand side sound like they're coming out of the right-hand speaker, and then on the left side sound like it's coming out of the left speaker as well. And in order to convert this into audio, we actually need to go from this content here, and we need to convert it to a chop. So we actually have this chop 2, and if we connect it over here, we're getting way too much information. We're basically going to treat red as the left channel and green as the right channel. So no need for the alpha or the blue. And the main way to configure this is actually to go in on the channel. We need to resample this to 44/100. And then set the extend right to cycle and the extend left to cycle. And you can already take this and connect it directly to a audio device out, and it's going to sound pretty intense. All right, I'll turn this off for now. So the way that this gets copied over to the audio buffer is by taking, right now it's actually just a single row of pixels, and it's only getting the middle. And we can kind of see here in the crop section, it's sampling this middle row essentially. And one way to get around that is to basically just flatten the image. And that way, no matter what, as long as something is happening in the left to the right hand side, it doesn't matter like up or down where those pixels are, we can kind of just average those. So we can insert a analyze, and what we can do here is take an average, but we'll do the columns. So now as long as something is happening on the left hand side, it will be brighter there, and if something's happening on the right hand side, it'll be brighter on that side as well. The other thing we want to do additionally is put it into a size that's going to play nicely with our audio buffer. Right now, our size is 1280 by 1. And what happens is that 1280, that's going to happen 60 times. And so this isn't going to actually like evenly distribute into our buffer, which is 44,100. But we can figure out what the correct image width will be. So if we take this and divide it by our frame rate, we can see that an image width of 735 is going to line up perfectly. So we'll go ahead and do this. We'll fit this to be 735. And we'll keep the same height. So this will be by 1. Now this should line up nicely for our audio buffer. And the last thing we want to do is actually encode different information for our left and right channels, because right now we're actually just outputting the same data to our left and right channels. So the best way to do that, I'll put a null back here so we can see it. We can actually just multiply this by a ramp. And for this, we can see if I just connect the input on the far left-hand side, we want to set this to all red. So that's going to be the left channel. And if you click on this little button, it's going to switch to RGB mode. So we can set this to red. And then on the tab on the right-hand side, we're going to click on this and we'll set this to 0 in the red, all green. And now we basically have encoded what is farther to the left and what's farther to the right. So if we connect this to our analyze, we can get rid of this null. Now you can see that we're getting much more detail and we can see like where things are happening on the left and right channels. So let's check this out. If I connect back in my video and I use my phone's flashlight and maybe turn the threshold up a little bit, let's see what it sounds like. So on the left-hand side, you can see that we're getting 0.4. We're getting a larger amount of data on the left channel. And then when I go to the right-hand side, you can see that we're getting much, much higher values, 0.04 instead of 0.04 on the right-hand channel. So now I'm going to go back and activate this audio. The last little thing, maybe instead of connecting this output, we'll actually want this, we'll want to reconnect our original output to our bloom for our visualization. So that way we can actually see what's happening. So one of the things that we're running into here that's an issue is that when nothing is being detected, we get this giant circle displayed. And because there's some pixels in here, that gets sent to our audio as well. So what I want to do is when nothing is detected, I want to have a transparent rendering. And then once something's detected, we'll switch to our original object detection. Let's go ahead and right click on this tab and insert a null. And that's going to make it easier for us to send a single channel to either our audio pipeline or to our visualization. And basically what we want to do is switch between our original input and then we're going to have a transparent layer. So we'll make the transparent layer with a constant and set the alpha to 0 and take this same input to share the resolution and we'll connect it to our switch. So when nothing is displayed, when there's no object detected, we'll be here with transparency, and then once an object is detected, it'll switch back to this. So we can put a null down, and you can see here once something is in the frame, we start getting this object detection. So there actually are no channels and no samples when nothing is detected. We can actually get a reference to that in our switch. So it's really easy. We can just drag and drop this onto the index, and we'll get a reference to null4, and we can say .num chans. If I hit enter, right now there's 0 channels. And what we want to say is it greater than 0? Well, it's not greater than 0. So we actually want to switch the order. So if it's not greater than 0, it'll be transparent. And now the second that it's greater than 0, it switches to our input. Hopefully that gives you some fun examples to play around with. And I think it's really fun also, you can create different visualizations instead of doing just the objects. You could also go in and swap out, instead of using lines, you could render these as solid objects and then use them as a mask. So let's say, for example, I did a constant material and then I put that on the circles. Now, wherever these objects show up, you could multiply it with the original image and start to kind of like fill in some of those different pieces, like only where the object detection is happening. There's a lot of different directions that you could take it. I want to go back to the original line drawing. Cool. Hopefully this gives you a sense of how to kind of customize these pieces and also to output some custom audio. For the next part, we're going to explore how to actually convert some of the object tracking, like positional data, and convert that into MIDI signals that we can then pick up in Ableton to sonify in different ways. I think while this effect works really well and like feels really, really snappy, like it feels super responsive to any visuals that you put in, it can be nice to have different ways of sonifying it that can sound a bit more melodic and things like that. So this next kind of toolkit that I've developed will allow you to really easily customize those pieces. So if you want to follow along with this next part, I am going to have this project file linked on my Patreon. You'll also need to have the newest version of Ableton installed. You could always just do a free trial of Live 12 if you want to play around with this. So you can do a Live 12 suite for 30 days, and then you can just install this and test it out. The only difference that you'll find in the example project is that there's going to be 3 new operators. One of them is just a null connected to your outputs called objects, this execute dat, and a MIDI out chop. So in order to be able to send these MIDI notes, we first need a way of being able to route the MIDI internally on your computer. So I'm going to first show how to get that configured for Mac, and then I'll show how to do that for Windows. So on Mac, you're going to open up the MIDI audio setup. And this software is going to look pretty confusing at first, but if you go to Window and you go to Show MIDI Studio, there's going to be this section called IAC driver. And if you open that up, I already have one here created, but if you're on Mac, you're going to hit this plus button here and you can give it bus 2, and this is going to be IAC driver 2. We'll hit apply. And basically this has opened up a port that will show up as a MIDI device for Ableton and TouchDesigner. On Windows, once you have Loop MIDI installed, go ahead and open it up. This is what it's going to look like, and hit the plus button in the far left-hand corner, and then go ahead and give the port whatever name you want. So if we go back to TouchDesigner and you go to the dialogues and you go to the MIDI device mapper, we'll create a new mapping. And for the input, we can do, check it out. It shows up here. In my case, I'm just going to use bus 1 because that's what I've configured, and bus 1, but you'll have to have created this. And now the key thing to note is that on the device mapper, notice that this is set to channel 1 and ID 1. So on this MIDI out, you actually need to make sure that the device ID is set to the same number. If you have multiple MIDI devices, you'll have different IDs for each one of those devices. So we'll keep it consistent. So if we go ahead and open up Ableton, you can see I've got a couple examples here just for potential sounds. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a blank project in Ableton just to get this configured. And basically the way that this is going to work is that if you go into Live and you go to Settings, go down to Link Tempo MIDI, and here you'll notice that I have a particular device here. The control surface is none. And then as the input, you're going to select your IAC driver or whatever you've decided to name it. In our case, it's bus 1. And for our output, it's going to be IAC driver bus 1. And same thing on Windows, whatever you decided to name it. So what's great is that now as I start to send these signals over, you should actually see in this top right corner like a blinking symbol when MIDI is coming in, and then you'll also see it kind of popping up on these all channels. And in order to like arm one of these tracks, you will click this button here, and this track is now armed. So then we can be receiving the MIDI input here, and we can start to customize our audio. So the way that this patch works is that I've actually configured it so that it allows us to pick a bass key. So we can, if you decide what MIDI note you want to use as your sort of starting note, it's going to basically set it up so that things that are lower in the screen are going to be lower notes. Things that are higher in the screen are higher notes. And I took the velocity, how hard you hit the key. Instead of sending that pressure value, I've actually encoded the X and the X position to the velocity. So what I've been able to do is configure it so that as your object detection is happening on the left to right hand side of the screen, you can change your sound, and I figured out how to basically pan it so that it's either on the left hand side or further to the right hand side, depending on the velocity, which is super, super nice. And I think those type of ways of adding that expressiveness into your installation go a long way. You can also change your scale here. If you go in, instead of major, we also have like minor, blues, different ways of kind of customizing those notes that are getting sent out. And at the very, very top here, there's this note delay. So if you want the notes to be held down for longer, you can set this value higher, or you can set it to a smaller value for sort of like short notes. Let's go ahead and start creating some content in Ableton. One kind of like quick way of making these sort of like popping, crackling sounds is to maybe just use a simpler. And if you go over to instruments, we can drag simpler onto this component here. And basically you need like some starting sound. So in our case, maybe what we'll do is grab like a snare drum under the sounds. Ooh. And we can drag and drop this into our patch. And watch what happens even now. It's going to basically start to pitch this up and down. And you can either change from this classic mode to one shot. You can also do slices. I think this is a really fun way of getting a bunch of like interesting sounds out of it. Instead of using the slice by transients, like if you have a longer song that has a bunch of beats in it, this can be a nice way of just kind of chopping it up. But in our case, we could do a region, and we could set it to a bunch of little regions. And if I zoom out, I can get this little tail end and scoot it in. So now as these little MIDI notes start to play, it'll start sampling these sort of different starting positions from it. And that can be fun. Maybe what we could do is put like a little reverb. We could put in a little reverb over here. We could change the size of it and maybe increase the decay a little bit. Make it feel a little bit more spacious. So the other thing I want to do is I basically want to take the positional data and I want to apply it to where it's being panned. So in our case, we actually want to be able to capture that information. There's a new instrument called expressive control. So if we just go to all, and then we just drag in this expressive control beforehand, what it allows us to do is snag MIDI information and then map it to whatever parameters that we want. So in our case, we'll see that the velocity, you can see here, it's like pretty low. And then as we go to the right-hand side, it's larger and louder. And so that's because I'm encoding that information. If that's something you want to keep, feel free to leave it there. But our way of changing the volume right now on the velocity is right here. So if you want it so that the velocity, how hard that note's being pressed, is directly mapping to the volume, you can change that on this slider right here. And so now it'll be very quiet and very, very loud on the right. But in our case, I wanted to basically change the panning based off the velocity. So right now, if I set this to 0, it's going to be the same velocity for all the notes, depending on the position. And if we go to controls over here, notice that we have this pan section. So right now, if I drag this pan to the far left, that's now going out of the left speaker. To the far right, that's going to be the right speaker. And so now we can take this source velocity, and right underneath it, you can click on map. And now we can just click on this pan, and now we've basically linked those together. You can see that this target is set to pan, and that now looks like it's mapping correctly. So at the far left, we can kind of see that we get larger sounds in the left channel, and on the far right, we're getting larger sounds in the right channel. And it'll fade in the middle. So as objects move to the center, it will sound like it's coming from the center channel. So what's great is that we can use this technique. We can go back to this sample mode. We can use all these different types of sounds for this. So I'm going to actually take this entire instrument and duplicate it. And now we have that as a potential sound we can use. Now that we've duplicated this, what I actually want to do is try to experiment with some different sounds. So feel free to drag any sample into here and play around with either the classic, one shot, or slice and see what it sounds like. So for example, if you are working with the waves video, maybe try and drag a sample that sounds like actual waves. So what I ended up doing is actually just took a little sample of some wave sounds and try just dragging and dropping that audio sample in. One thing to note is that if you have it on this trigger mode, it will play through the entire sample. So for example, if I dragged in this new sample, I can kind of pick the start and end by dragging these sliders over here. And if it's on trigger, watch what happens. It'll keep playing all the way through. If I put it on gate, now it'll just play like a short little snippet and also stick to the duration that we picked for our MIDI note being pressed down and picked up. So we can kind of use this to get some interesting effects where it's still repitching things depending on the height. And maybe let's see what happens in the classic sample. You can also go to slice and we'll do something similar. So instead of by transients, I mean, this actually does work if you have a larger clip. There's not quite enough slices. So maybe we'll go by region and then we'll just add in a bunch of different regions. And you can kind of compress it around a particular snippet that you like. So if we do it in here, that can be a fun way of doing it. Another thing that I was experimenting with was like using voices. So I went in and I was actually having a lot of fun with some of the new packs that are available in Ableton. So if you head on over to the packs section, there are in these available packs to download. I found one called VoiceBox. The expressive chords and those two combined, I think were really, really interesting. So in the voice box, I took an audio snippet from the samples and there's kind of a breathy voice. So I dragged this sample in and I thought this one was an interesting to basically resample. One thing that can be really fun is take this expressive chords and drag this before your expressive control and check this out. So instead of playing individual notes, it has the ability to play whole chords and you can add strum in. This is like a new feature. And I felt like this sounded really good also if you were to snag the, in the voice box, you can actually just drag in the entire instrument. So there's a chromatic voices that you could, if you open up their instruments and swap out the entire instrument here. I think it'd be a really nice way of adding some extra tone. You could even do a spacious version. So first, if you want to be able to change the panning, you'll have to do something similar here where we basically want to open up the actual sampler that's involved. And we can do something similar with the panning. And you can find that on this filter/global. So it looks like the velocity to volume is turned off right now, which is good. And then panning is right underneath it. We'll basically do the same thing where we map our velocity and we can click on this panning. And now, depending on the note, it'll end up mapping those to your left and right panning. One of the things is that you can always go back and you can have multiple of these different instruments connected. So for example, we just have this chromatic voice hooked up. We can always go back in and I can resample this snare drum that we were doing earlier. And right, I can have just this audio going, or I can go in and I could hold Option down and then click on the other one, and now I can have both of those channels armed. And so we can start to layer those two pieces together. I'm going to take this project file and it'll be available on my Patreon. For this particular project, you would need to make sure to have the voice box downloaded and the different plugins downloaded. So it's not all going to like open up out of the box, but I will include this project file for you to experiment with. Same thing as well, where you would need to make sure to have Ableton Live configured to be able to connect to the MIDI device correctly. Yeah, there's so many different ways to play around with this, and people are making some really incredible visuals, and it's so fun to tie in the audio side of it. And so I hope this gave you some inspiration on how to bring that into your projects. And yeah, if you're interested in more of this, I would love to do more kind of in-depth audio tutorials. So let me know what you're thinking. Thanks for following along, and I'm really excited to see what you all create using this technique. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.